Welcome to StopFake, the place where we set the record straight on disinformation about Ukraine. I'm Fulbright Clinton Fellow Nina Jankowicz with StopFake's latest dissection of Russian alternate reality. This week's stories include Russian claims about the EU ending visa-free travel for Ukrainians because of the war in the Donbas, IMF requisitions 80% of Ukraine's gold reserves, and President Poroshenko advocates building a wall between Ukraine and the separatist-controlled enclave. So, let's get to the details. Last week, RT's Russian-language news site ran a story claiming that the European Union can rescind visa-free travel for Ukraine at any moment, if it so desires. Among the possible reasons for ending visa-free travel, which will begin in mid-June, RT names corruption, security concerns, particularly with regard to the war in eastern Ukraine, and illegal migration, especially what RT calls the ignorance of Ukrainians about border-crossing rules. StopFake inquired whether it was possible for the EU to end visa-free travel for Ukrainians, and if so, under what conditions. David Stulik, the EU delegation to Ukraine press officer, told us that since the suspension of visas for Ukrainians has just been approved and the visa-free regime has not yet entered into force, speculating about its suspension is absolutely senseless. RT's claims also do not hold water. Battling corruption and strengthening anti-corruption institutions is one aspect of the reforms required for visa-free travel. Ukraine has enacted the necessary legislation in this regard, which the EU will monitor for a period of 7 years. Security and the war in eastern Ukraine were never part of negotiations between the EU and Ukraine, and they cannot be a reason for ending visa-free travel, Stulik said. As far as illegal migration is concerned, the Ukrainian government and the country's media have conducted a comprehensive campaign on EU visa-free travel, informing Ukrainians that only 90-day tourist visas, not work visas, are part of the package. It is absurd to predict the doom of visa-free travel before it has even gone into effect. Even if the migration situation changed dramatically, visa-free travel could be stopped only after a comprehensive review by the European Commission, the European Council, and the EU Parliament. The EU has visa-free arrangements with several countries, and those agreements have never been rescinded for any reason. Russian Defense Ministry television channel Zvezda published a fake story claiming that the International Monetary Fund requisitioned 80% of Ukraine's gold reserves to cover the country's debts. The source for this dubious claim was Sergei Arbuzov, former Ukrainian National Bank chairman and deputy prime minister in the discredited government of ousted President Viktor Yanukovych. Mr. Arbuzov, along with Yanukovych and other members of the former government, fled Ukraine and is currently hiding in Moscow. Zvezda claims that 75% of Ukraine's gold reserves are under direct IMF control in order to pay back Ukraine's many debts. It also claims that out of the $17.2 billion in reserves, Ukraine only has access to $4 billion, and even that sum is perpetually shrinking. Russian sites Politnavigator, Novorossiya, Trud, and others featured stories with similar fake claims, as did the Ukrainian sites Korrespondent and 2000. Such claims are completely inaccurate, as Ukraine's gold reserves are in fact growing. According to Economic Strategy Center Acting Director Gleb Vyshlinsky, in 2017 alone, Ukraine's gold reserves increased by $2 billion. And in 2016, the portion of Ukraine's reserves provided by IMF credits fell from 81% to 75%. Vyshlinsky pointed out that between 2011 and 2013, during the Yanukovych presidency, a period when there was no war and the country's biggest trading partner was Russia, Ukraine lost $18 billion worth of gold reserves in a span of only 2 years. Under Yanukovych's and Arbuzov's rule, the country's reserves were drained by theft from 38 to 20 billion. A recent court decision confiscating over $1 billion from Viktor Yanukovych also helps to strengthen Ukraine's finances, bringing the country's reserves to more than $18 billion US. Another positive factor for Ukraine's finances is the recent S&P stable rating for Ukraine's long and short-term sovereign credit. According to the agency's forecast, Ukraine will meet its short-term debt obligations for 2017, $2.6 billion, and 2018, $3.9 billion. RIA Novosti Ukraina published an article claiming that Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko advocated cutting off the Donbas and building a wall to separate it from Ukraine. Poroshenko allegedly expressed this view during a May 14th press conference. What the Ukrainian president in fact said was quite the opposite. He defended the Minsk peace accords. This far from perfect agreement allowed Kyiv to stop Russia from further incursion into Ukraine, introduce sanctions against Moscow, and force Russia to pay a price for the war in Ukraine, Poroshenko said, although the price was not an adequate one. We can't achieve peace because Putin has no intentions of fulfilling the Minsk Accords, but these accords allow us to show who is guilty. Within the framework of international law, they will force Russia to pay a price for their violation, Poroshenko said. There is an offer to cut off these lands, to give them to Putin, build a wall, and forget about the Donbas, because we will never get it back. These are not propositions that I could ever consider, said Ukraine's president. A snippet of a phrase pulled out of context and presented according to the Kremlin line is part and parcel of the Russian propaganda machine's agenda. This fake story is a perfect example of that fine-tuned method. That's it for this week. Be vigilant and beware of fakes. If you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, send it to us for a truth autopsy. Remember, to stay healthy, don't consume fake news, think before you share. Your brain will thank you, and the psychological climate of society will not suffer a precipitous decline. I'm Nina Jankowicz, and this is StopFake. Thanks for watching.